Hello everyone, and welcome back to another video on the Siley Stats YouTube channel. This time it is part 3. I promise this will be the last part of my Nationals predictions. In fact, I hope to make this video under 20 or 15 minutes. We'll go for 15 minutes. Let's be ambitious here. We're going to try and make this under 15 minutes, because if you want to watch all these, then it's already going to take you over an hour. But yeah, let me just start by finishing up Harriton's section. When I was talking about them at the very end of the last video, I didn't quite get to the end. So let me just do a quick review. I put in the description of the last video a brief overview of Harriton's record this year. But to summarize, they did very well at MIT. This was their B team at Battle at Valley Forge. They did pretty good at Dick Smith as well. Jordan, they presumably competed under the alias Pingus, so I'm not going to count this towards them because we don't know it was them. That's just the rumor. And at Soup, this was by far their worst tournament performance this year. Not very good here. And then at States, they did pretty decent. They did okay, I guess, at States. Not the best score, not the worst score. Beat Cumberland Valley by a decent bit. So could be worse. It could be worse for Harriton. They could very well be better than New Trier and Stevenson. They might be in the top 10 here. I don't think they're better than Montgomery, though. I think Montgomery will beat them at Nationals. Marquette could also be better than Harriton, so I'd put them anywhere in this range, but I'm going to settle on 11th here. Now, finally, let's get into the top 10. So, we're kicking off the top 10 with New Trier, of all teams. I know in some of my recent videos, I didn't speak very highly of New Trier. And that's mainly because of one tournament that I've talked about quite a bit in these national prediction videos. But I'll talk about it again here in a minute. Let's start with MIT, though. MIT, they did pretty good. Again, Harriton ended up beating them here. So did Westminster Plainsboro, by the way. Did I even look at Westminster Plainsboro's record? I'm just now realizing this. When I talked about them, I think I only talked about their disadvantage here. I didn't talk about their record, but needless to say, this is by far their best performance here. Anyway, back to New Trier. So, yeah, they did very well at MIT. Harlem, I mean, if this was their A team, then this is terrible, but I mean, that's probably not their A team. Boyceville, they did okay here. Again, I still haven't super scored Stevenson, but when they're super scored, they probably will end up beating New Trier. Thomas Jefferson, they beat. Enloe, they beat. Fulton Science, they beat. Marquette beat them by a decent margin, though. Palatine, again, this is a decent performance. They do end up beating Marquette here when they're super scored. Whoopsies. There we go. And now we're back to the top. So this, Northwestern, this is by far New Trier's worst tournament performance. 8th and 11th unstacked, and when they're super scored, they still don't do that great. They end up beating Madison West, Marquette ends up beating them, and Stevenson absolutely crushes their super scored. And Stevenson was unstacked too, so I mean, this is unstacked versus unstacked. You can see they just don't do very well here. But I do think this is a one-off. I think that otherwise, New Trier is very strong here. Again, Loyola, they compete against Marquette unstacked, and they end up crushing them. At Solon, again, Solon, not the best performance for New Trier. Cumberland Valley beats them outright. I've mentioned this in many, many videos. These teams were both stacked, and Cumberland Valley ended up beating them. And then we're back to MIT. So a very mixed bag for New Trier. But I do think their state competition ends up putting them over the edge. Where is their state competition? Here it is. They end up beating Stevenson on a tiebreaker. Decent scores all around. Let's look at Illinois State's last year, if we can manage it. I guess I need to add that. There we go. So last year, they got 78, and Stevenson got 50. So actually, yeah, they did exactly the same as last year. So yeah, not a bad performance. And what did they get last year? What place did they get? They got 9th. Okay, so 10th seems fair. Next, Stevenson, the defending national champion. I have been predicting since the start they will not be the national champion any longer. In fact, if they're only giving trophies to the top 6 teams at nationals, they won't even get a trophy this year if this prediction ends up being correct. So, Stevenson, not doing bad this year, but again, just not at the level they were last year. Nowhere close to the level they were last year. Here at MIT, Nutrier ends up beating them by not a super big margin, but definitely a significant one. And otherwise, at MIT, they just don't do super great. Again, 13th is fine at MIT, but for a really competitive team like Stevenson, you certainly expect better. Here at Solon, again, unstacked, they don't do that great. When they're stacked, they do end up beating Cumberland Valley, not beating Seven Lakes, though. And again, they do end up beating Nutrier when they're super scored. MIT we just talked about. At Marquette, again, super scored. They end up doing pretty good, but don't beat Marquette even when they're super scored. Boyceville, again, I really should have super scored them. At this point, it's not going to happen, though. But when they're super scored, they'll probably be 3rd or 2nd or something. Palatine, again, super scored. Yeah, okay, so they scratched in Scrambler, so I gave them the same rank as Nutrier. Nutrier actually does beat them when both of them are super scored. And then we're back to the top. Northwestern, again, they crush Stevenson, or they crush Nutrier here. They beat Clark, and this super score beats Marquette again. So I do feel comfortable putting them above Marquette. Consistently, when they're super scored, they do end up beating Marquette. Whoops, I keep going to that. And even though Nutrier beat them at their state competition, I do think Stevenson will beat them at nationals. Just barely, though. I do have these teams right next to each other. So I think it'll be close, but considering how frequently Stevenson beats Nutrier in invitationals and the fact that Nutrier only beat them on a tiebreaker, Stevenson, I believe, will beat Nutrier at nationals this year. Next, Montgomery in 8th. We look at Montgomery's record, just amazing across the board, quite frankly. Columbia, they beat Lexington in Great Neck South. And MIT, they do very well, not quite as well as Harriton, but they do end up beating Nutrier. They end up beating, Jordan and Stevenson and Clements and all these other competitive teams. Palatine, or sorry, not Palatine, Cornell, they end up doing very well. They lose to Syosset, though. We'll get to Syosset in a minute. Westminster, Westminster does beat them when they are, well, that's Westminster South, actually. Huh. Interesting. Anyway. Yeah, and then at Soup, this might be their best performance, honestly. They crush, well, I shouldn't say they crush. They beat Cumberland Valley and Enloe by a very large margin. Not even very large, a large margin. They beat them by a large margin. There you go. And then Princeton, super scoreds, they end up beating Lower Merion. So, Westminster Plainsboro North does beat them super scored here. But again, I already talked about Westminster. So yeah, again, just a good record across the board. I think that warrants 8th. Next, Syosset. So this is a team that I've had in the top 10 since the very beginning. Last year at Nationals, I believe, yep, they got 12th, falling outside the top 10. As you can see, I expect them to do significantly better this year. At MIT, fantastic. Absolutely amazing performance at MIT from them. Getting 3rd with a score of 299 at MIT is amazing. Capital area, this was certainly not Syosset at full strength. Battle at Valley Forge, they take this, again, beating Great Neck South, beating CV. Lower Merion Super Score does end up beating them very slightly. But then at Cornell, beating Montgomery and Westminster South by a very large margin. And, of course, beating Lower Merion as well. Wait. Oh, this is weird. Okay, I have something screwed up here because oh, never mind. South Windsor's from Connecticut. I thought I was talking about Westminster South when I said South Windsor. Man, all right, whatever. I'm getting off topic here. UMass Lexington actually ends up beating them. This could be, they were missing some teams or something like that, or not some teams, some some people. That's the word. So yeah, then at Brown, they end up doing well, beating Lexington, not quite beating Boxborough though. And then we're back to MIT. MIT is by far their strongest performance. They have fallen a little bit since I've started making, ranking teams. I think I had them in like 4th or 5th or something early. But again, 7th, still a very good place for Syosset, especially considering where they were last year. And we're already at 10 minutes, so we're probably going to be over 15 minutes. But we're shooting for under 20. That's the new goal. Now, we get into the top 6. So, again, if they do it like they did last year, top 6 will get medals. Or not medals, trophies. So, taking my prediction for the 6th place trophy is Mason. So, Mason needs no introduction. You know who Mason is. Very competitive team from Ohio, second only to Solon in the state. Yeah, I mean, just a fantastic record across the board. What do you want me to say? Mentor, they do really well. Solon, they do really well when they're stacked, or when they're super scored. MIT, not quite as well as you'd expect. Still a very, very strong performance, though. Don't get me wrong. Then at Soaps, they do very well. Again, they win even when they're not super scored. And when they are super scored, they end up winning by even more. North Mounts, again, do very well. The only competition here is Solon for them. Sometimes they actually do end up beating Solon. Maybe I already went past an invitational where they ended up beating Solon. But here, again, they crushed Carmel when both are super scored. Here at Northview, super scored, they end up, again, getting very close to Solon, crushing Novi. University of Michigan. Yeah, so this was the one that they ended up beating Solon. Even though I have probably not unstacked here, you don't even need to super score them for them to beat Solon's super scored score. So, however, I believe that Solon, especially considering the Ohio State results here. Oh, whoopsies. Hold on, let me get these up here. I went past them. There we go. All right, yeah. So Solon absolutely crushes Mason at the Ohio State tournament. So that's part of why I have Solon so much higher than Mason. But Mason, again, fantastic performance across the board. Acton Boxborough from Massachusetts. Again, just across the board, very strong performances from them. Here, unstacked, they managed to beat Syosset. Unstacked, they beat Syosset, the 3rd place team at MIT. Absolutely insane. Harvard undergrad, again, unstacked. They beat Lexington. Just amazing. MIT, they were obviously unstacked here. One of the few competitive teams that was unstacked at MIT. When they're super scored, though, they end up beating Syosset. Well, basically tying with Syosset. Still, though, amazing. And we're back to Brown now. So just, there's not a bad performance to point to. The only thing is that this is where some knowledge of history comes in. So Acton Boxborough has a tendency to do very well in invitationals, but then not do so well at the national tournament. I do think they'll do better this year. If you remember correctly, not too long before I made this video, I actually had them in 4th. I ended up moving 7 Lakes ahead of them. I think this is where I'll keep it, but this could be really close between like these 3 even. I can see Boxborough getting into the top 3 maybe. If their tournament performances, or if their invitational performances dictated their national performance, I'd put them in 3rd, maybe even 2nd. But just, again, history shows us that Acton Boxborough has a tendency to not do so well at nationals. Again, Acton, prove me wrong. Next, 7 Lakes I have in 4th. So, again, there's just not a bad performance to point to. Really, once you get past like Stevenson and even maybe Montgomery, all of these teams, there's not really a bad performance that you can look at and say, wow, they really didn't do great there. Because, I mean, all of these teams are fantastic. But 7 Lakes, I'm thinking, will take 4th. Now, let's look at their results, right? Solon, they beat, they beat every team other than Solon. Then you go to MIT. They get second here, only losing to Troy. Very significant margin there, though. But again, second at MIT, fantastic. University of Austin, likely unstacked probably. They end up beating Jordan and Clemens. Amazing. I'm just going through these in rapid fire session. Cypress Falls, quite a while ago, they end up losing to Jordan, who unfortunately didn't make it to nationals. But again, still just not a terrible. Well, okay, actually, okay, maybe this result isn't the best for them. But again, this might have been a not full strength. In fact, very likely not full strength. Seven Lakes. If this was full strength, I'd expect them to be at least at like 110, maybe. Then Rickards. Again, when they're super scored, they beat Monte Vista. And Highlands is very old. So again, just a fantastic performance across the board. Their state competition did make me doubt them a little bit. You know, this score, I kind of expected a little higher of them, maybe in the 50s range. But again, not a bad state score, so I think they deserve fourth. Now we're getting into the top three. So, Monte Vista, I'm giving the third place spot for my predictions. Again, Monte Vista, there's just not a bad ranking to point to. Consistently, they get first in competitive tournaments. This one not as competitive. A bunch of California teams. There's Mountain View here competing in exhibition. Never mind, not exhibition. But obviously not at full strength there. Stanford, they get first. Again, not the most competitive California teams. Maria Loma, they do end up losing to Troy here and Mountain View. A little unfortunate, but I mean, this is very likely not their team at full strength. In fact, they even scratched in air trajectory there. So obviously not at full strength there. Birdso, again, obviously not at full strength, probably their B team. Gulso, they get first. They beat Mountain View. Dick Smith, they get first. They beat Cumberland Valley, even when they're super scored. Harriton super scored does end up beating them when you account for the fact that Harriton scratched in the build events. Boyceville, they get first, you know, beating Ward Millville and Tesla STEM and all these other teams that I mentioned before. Rickards, they get first, beating Seven Lakes. Again, when Seven Lakes is super scored, they end up beating Monte Vista. Highlands, again, very old. Golden Gates, Troy does end up beating them here, which is why, of course, I have Troy ahead of them nationally. But yeah, Golden Gate, again, very strong performance, beating Mountain View. And I believe we talked about this one. So, yeah, again, just when they're at full strength, they don't miss when they're at full strength is what I'm trying to say. Really, the only team that can semi-consistently beat them is Troy and maybe Seven Lakes. So I can see Seven Lakes beating them. But speaking of Troy, let's talk about Troy. Again, Troy needs no introduction. Widely considered one of the most consistently best Science Olympiad teams in the country. So yeah, let's just take a look. Again, Troy not at full strength here. Glen A. Wilson. Also, Glen A. Wilson beating them at their own invitational. You know. But MIT taking first by a large margin too. I mean, that is no laughing matter there. Extremely good for Troy. Maria Loma, again, when they're super scored, they almost beat Mountain View, losing them just by a little bit. Nothing too major there. Great Oak, again, not really the most competitive California teams they're up against. I didn't even bother super scoring them here. You know they dominate that. Golden Gate here, beating Monte Vista and Mountain View and Glen A. Wilson and Liberal Arts and Science Academy. You know, all these competitive teams. And then I think we're back to Glen A. Wilson. So again, MIT is probably by far their best tournament performance, but even besides that, they do very well in a lot of their tournaments. And if we look at their state competition, I believe they are in the South. Yes, they are in the South. They absolutely dominate here. So no grievances about putting Troy in second. Only second to number one, Solon. You know how it is. You know Solon. I attended their invitational. It was fantastic. Solon, again, just consistently one of the best teams in the country. Last year, I think they got second, if I'm not mistaken. Yes, they got second at nationals last year. they're very likely going for first here. That's probably their team goal. So again, Ohio, again, I mean, I can go through this all day, right? Ohio State University, they do very well. Northmount, they do very well. Northview, they do very well. Even when they're unstacked, they manage to dominate these tournaments. Like, I mean, what do you want me to say? The only notable tournament they didn't attend was MIT, and if they had, I expect them to get first or maybe second. But yeah, losing to Troy, maybe not by a significant margin there if they did get second. Again, University of Michigan slipped up a little. Mason ended up beating them even when they're not super scored. But again, just across the board, a fantastic array of performances from Solon here. So I have no doubts about putting them in first here. So that will do it for my national prediction. I'm not going to read through all these because that's going to take forever. And you're probably done listening to me talk anyway. So thank you very much for watching. Again, this will be my last prediction video for the 2024 season. And as I've said multiple times, I will be going to nationals. I'll be vlogging it. I'll be posting that vlog within probably a week or two of coming back. Yeah, part of the reason this series of prediction videos for nationals has taken so long to get out was because I'm working this summer. I'm doing research, and yeah, it's taking a lot more of my time than I expected. It's very fun, but it's very time consuming. So yeah, I haven't had as much time to work on this as I wanted. But yeah, this is my prediction for the 2024 National Science Olympiad Tournament. I will see you there. Have a great day. Bye.